My name is Naomi Carter Mercer. I was 32 years old, 8 months pregnant, and the man gripping my arm in the middle of that crowded bus was my husband, Daniel. "Get up! My father is still standing!" His voice cut through the engine noise so sharply that every nearby conversation stopped. Before I could answer, Daniel pulled me out of the priority seat. My feet found the floor unevenly, and I caught the metal rail beside me before I lost my balance. Daniel barely looked at me. He was focused on his father, Harold, who stood in the aisle waiting for the seat I had just been forced to surrender. Harold hesitated for half a second. Then he sat down. No objection, no concern, not even a glance at my stomach. The whole bus went silent. I stood there with one hand wrapped around the rail and the other resting protectively over my daughter. I could feel people watching, but nobody moved. Daniel's fingers were still pressing against my sleeve as though I might try to reclaim the seat. I wanted to believe he had panicked. I wanted to believe he had forgotten how far along I was. But the expression on his face was not panic. It was satisfaction. He had proved something to his father, and the fact that he had humiliated me to do it did not seem to matter. Then, an elderly man sitting 2 rows behind us lifted his phone. Daniel saw it. For the first time since dragging me up, the certainty disappeared from his face. The stranger leaned forward, ready to speak, and I had no idea that his next 3 words would follow Daniel into a formal investigation, or that the evidence on his phone would expose something much larger than one cruel moment on a bus. Before I tell you exactly what he said, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video if you believe family loyalty should never require someone to surrender their safety or dignity. To understand why those 3 words changed everything, I need to take you back 20 minutes before Daniel raised his voice, before the bus went silent, and before I finally saw my marriage clearly. That Saturday afternoon, the 3 of us had just finished a family errand downtown. The return bus was already crowded when it reached our stop. Daniel entered first, holding the door long enough for Harold to follow. I boarded last, moving carefully as the driver waited for me to clear the steps. Standing had become difficult during the final weeks of my pregnancy. Even short trips left pressure across my lower back, and sudden stops made it hard to keep my balance. Daniel knew that. He had attended enough appointments to hear the same instructions I had: avoid unnecessary strain, use support when available, and do not ignore discomfort. As we moved down the aisle, passengers shifted their bags and knees to make room. Nearly every seat was occupied. Then I saw one empty place near the front. It was beneath the priority seating sign marked for elderly passengers, people with disabilities, and expectant mothers. I lowered myself into it with both hands supporting my stomach. The relief was immediate. Daniel remained beside me, holding an overhead strap. Harold stood across the aisle with one hand on the rail. He was 67 and had mild arthritis, but he still drove, handled his own errands, and regularly insisted that he was perfectly capable of looking after himself. That afternoon, he appeared steady. He was not struggling for breath. His knees were not giving way. He had not asked anyone to move. Still, Daniel kept looking at him. Then he looked at me. At first, I thought he was checking whether I was comfortable. "Dad is standing," he said. "I can see that." Harold glanced toward the back of the bus as though another seat might become available. "It's only a few stops?" His words should have ended the matter. Instead, Daniel's jaw tightened. He lowered his voice. "You should let him sit." I looked at him, waiting for some sign that he was joking. "I'm 8 months pregnant. I know how pregnant you are." The answer unsettled me more than if he had denied it. Daniel understood my condition. He simply believed something else mattered more. The bus pulled away from the curb. I placed one hand against the wall beside the seat to steady myself. "Harold said he can stand," I told him. Daniel's eyes moved toward his father again. Harold had gone quiet. He did not repeat that he was fine. He did not tell Daniel to leave me alone. He simply waited. Several passengers were close enough to hear us. Daniel noticed them watching, and something in his posture changed. What could have remained a private disagreement suddenly became a public test of his loyalty. His voice hardened. "My father shouldn't have to ask." "He didn't ask. That isn't the point." I stared at him. Daniel had always been attentive to Harold's preferences. Restaurant plans changed if his father disliked the menu. Family gatherings revolved around Harold's schedule. At meals, everyone waited until he occupied the chair at the head of the table. But this was different. This was not a restaurant reservation or a holiday schedule. I needed that seat. Our daughter needed me to remain steady. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I'm not getting up." The words felt unnatural in my mouth. I had disagreed with him before, but I usually softened my refusal until it sounded like an apology. This time, there was nowhere to soften it. Daniel stared at me. Then he looked at Harold. His father said nothing. Daniel turned back toward me, his face reddening. "Get up," he ordered. "No." People had stopped pretending not to listen. A woman across the aisle lowered the book she had been reading. A teenager near the door removed one earphone. Even the driver glanced toward us through the overhead mirror. Daniel leaned closer. "Don't embarrass me." The words nearly made me laugh, though nothing about the moment was funny. I was sitting beneath a sign that specifically included pregnant passengers, yet Daniel believed my refusal was the embarrassing part. "I need the seat," I repeated. His hand closed around my upper arm. For one suspended second, I thought he was only trying to frighten me into obeying. Then he pulled. "Get up." "My father is still standing." I rose too quickly, reaching for the nearest rail as the bus continued moving. A collective breath passed through the passengers. Daniel guided Harold toward the empty place as though he had accomplished something honorable. Harold looked at the priority sign, then he sat down. Daniel remained between me and the seat. Nobody spoke. The silence felt worse than shouting. It gave Daniel space to behave as if what he had done was normal. I looked from my husband to his father and understood that neither man believed I had been wronged. In their eyes, the family hierarchy had simply been restored. Then a calm voice came from behind us. An elderly passenger stood holding his phone where Daniel could see it. His name was Arthur Bell, though I did not know that yet. Daniel turned toward him. Arthur met his eyes and spoke 3 words. "I recorded everything." Daniel stared at Arthur as if the phone were a weapon. "What do you mean? You recorded it?" Arthur did not lower his hand. "I mean exactly what I said." Daniel stepped toward him, but the bus slowed sharply before he could move farther. The driver guided us to the curb, switched on the hazard lights, and secured the vehicle. "Everyone stay where you are," she called. Her name was Elena Ruiz. I learned that later from the incident report. In that moment, she was simply the first person with enough authority to stop everything from continuing as if nothing had happened. Daniel pointed toward Arthur. "He was recording us without permission." Arthur remained calm. "I started when you began threatening her." "I wasn't threatening anyone." The woman across the aisle stood and offered me her seat. I lowered myself into it, still holding the rail until I was certain my legs would support me. My daughter moved beneath my hand, and the sensation brought a rush of relief so strong that I almost cried. Daniel noticed. "See?" he said, addressing the passengers rather than me. "She's fine." That sentence changed something inside me. He had pulled his 8 months pregnant wife from a moving bus seat, watched me stumble, and decided that the absence of an immediate medical emergency proved he had done nothing wrong. Elena came out from behind the safety partition. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "I don't know," Daniel answered over me. "She isn't." Elena looked directly at him. "I asked her." The firmness in her voice silenced him. "My arm hurts," I said, and I stood too quickly. "I want to make sure the baby is all right." Daniel released an exasperated breath. Harold remained in the priority seat. He looked around at the passengers, his face tightening as though their attention were the real injustice. "I never asked him to move her," he said. Arthur turned slightly, keeping the phone secure. "You accepted the seat. I'm 67, and she's 8 months pregnant." Harold looked away. Elena returned to the driver's area and contacted dispatch. She reported a passenger disturbance involving a pregnant woman and requested medical assistance. She also identified the bus number and camera system. That was when Daniel's expression changed again. "The bus has cameras?" I asked. Elena nodded. "More than one." Daniel looked toward the ceiling. For years, he had won arguments by reducing them to private disagreements. If I remembered something differently, he called it a misunderstanding. If his words hurt me, he said I had focused on his tone instead of his intention. But now, there was Arthur's phone. There were the bus cameras. There was Elena. There were passengers who had watched him pull me up after I told him I needed the seat. Daniel crouched beside me. "Naomi, this has gotten completely out of control." I stared at him. "You pulled me out of my seat. I helped you stand. I told you no. You were making a scene." A quiet, bitter realization settled over me. Daniel was not frightened because he had endangered me. He was frightened because other people had seen it. The bus doors remained closed while we waited. Arthur moved closer, leaving enough space that I did not feel crowded. "My name is Arthur Bell," he said. "I can send you the original recording." "Thank you. I won't post it anywhere. It belongs with you and whoever needs to review it." Daniel heard him. "There is nothing to review." Arthur met his eyes. "That won't be your decision alone." Daniel stood so quickly that Elena warned him to remain back. A few minutes later, medical responders arrived with a transit supervisor and 2 officers. The passengers were allowed to leave after providing contact details if they wished to give statements. Several stayed. That surprised me almost as much as Arthur's intervention. The woman who had offered me her seat explained that she had heard me say I was 8 months pregnant. The teenager near the door confirmed that the bus had been moving when Daniel pulled me up. Another passenger described Harold sitting down without objecting. Daniel repeatedly attempted to answer for me. Eventually, one officer directed him to the rear of the bus while the other took my statement. The moment Daniel moved away, I could breathe more easily. The medical responder checked me and asked whether I wanted to be evaluated at the hospital. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say no. It was the same instinct that had guided me through 5 years of marriage. Make the situation smaller, reduce the inconvenience, and help everyone return to normal. Then I looked at Daniel. He was talking rapidly to the officer at the back of the bus, demonstrating with his hands how he claimed to have helped me stand. Harold stood beside him, nodding. Neither of them had asked if our daughter was safe. "Yes," I said, "I want to be evaluated." Daniel heard me. "Naomi, that's unnecessary." I turned away from him. The officer asked if I felt safe returning home with my husband. The question should have been easy. Until that afternoon, I would have answered automatically. Daniel had never struck me. He paid bills on time, remembered appointments, and kept our home orderly. For years, I had used those facts to reassure myself whenever his control became difficult to explain. But safety was not only the absence of one particular act. It was whether I could say no without being punished. It was whether my physical needs mattered when they conflicted with Harold's expectations. It was whether Daniel would protect me when nobody was watching and whether he would tell the truth when people were. "No," I said. My voice trembled, but I did not change my answer. "I don't feel safe going home with him." Daniel stopped speaking. For one brief moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Then his shock turned to anger. "You're going to say that about me?" The officer stepped between us. I took out my phone and called Lena, a friend who had previously told me I could use her spare room if I ever needed space. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to meet me at the hospital," I told her. She did not demand an explanation. "I'm leaving now." Daniel called my name again as the responders helped me from the bus. I did not look back. At the hospital, the examination confirmed that my daughter and I were stable. My arm was sore, and the sudden movement had placed unnecessary strain on me, but there was no immediate complication. Relief came first. Then came the shame. I knew the shame did not belong to me, yet it settled across my shoulders as if it did. Every time a nurse asked what had happened, I had to hear myself say it aloud. My husband pulled me from a bus seat because his father was standing. Each repetition made the situation sound both more unbelievable and more undeniable. Arthur sent the recording before I left the hospital. He included his full name and contact information and confirmed that he was willing to give a formal statement. Elena's transit report number arrived through the investigating officer. The officer also explained how the relevant transit footage could be preserved. By then, Daniel had sent 17 messages. The first demanded to know where I was. The next said I had embarrassed him in front of strangers. Only the sixth asked if the baby was all right. The final message read, "Come home. We can settle this privately." I stared at it until Lena placed her hand over my phone. "You don't have to answer tonight. I left everything there." "You left belongings," she said. "That isn't the same as leaving everything." I looked down at my stomach. For the first time, the distinction felt possible. I turned off the phone and went home with Lena instead of my husband. That was the first boundary I had ever set that Daniel could not talk me out of before morning. Lena's spare room contained a narrow bed, a lamp, and a dresser she cleared for me before we arrived. It was not where I had imagined spending the final weeks of my pregnancy. My hospital bag was still at the townhouse. The half-assembled crib stood in the room Daniel and I had painted together. My work clothes, medical records, and nearly every object associated with the life I had planned were behind a door I no longer felt safe opening alone. I barely slept. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw Harold lowering himself into the seat. Daniel's grip had frightened me, but Harold's silence disturbed me differently. He could have stopped his son with one sentence. Instead, he had accepted the reward. At 4 a.m, I turned my phone on again. The messages continued arriving. Daniel had moved from anger to apology without ever passing through responsibility. I should not have raised my voice. "I'm sorry you got scared. Dad was tired and I reacted. You know I would never hurt you." Every sentence separated my reaction from his decision. He was sorry about his volume, sorry about my fear, sorry about the attention. But he never wrote that forcing me from the seat had been wrong. Harold's message arrived shortly after midnight. "Daniel has sacrificed too much for you to be treated like a criminal over one misunderstanding. Correct the report before this destroys the family." I read it twice. Not once did he ask whether his granddaughter was safe. The family in Harold's mind was Daniel. Protecting the family meant protecting his son from consequences. My daughter and I were simply expected to absorb the cost. Lena found me awake before sunrise. "You're reading the messages," I nodded. "Do any of them make you feel safer?" The question was simple enough to be cruel. No. I opened Arthur's video. At first, the screen showed only the side of Daniel's face and the aisle between the seats. Arthur had begun recording after Daniel first told me his father was standing. My own voice sounded quieter than I remembered. I heard myself explain that I was 8 months pregnant. I heard Daniel acknowledge that he knew. Then came my refusal. The recording captured his hand closing around my arm. It captured the command. It captured me reaching for the rail. There was no sudden movement from the bus that Daniel could blame. There was no moment when I asked for help standing. There was only my clearly stated refusal, followed by his decision to ignore it. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. Watching it did not show me anything I had forgotten. It showed me how much I had already begun editing inside my mind. I had told myself Daniel reacted badly. The video showed him making a choice. I had told myself Harold was caught off guard. The video showed him waiting. I had told myself I might have sounded unreasonable. The video showed how carefully I tried to keep Daniel calm. Lena sat beside me without speaking. "I look afraid of him," I finally said. "You were afraid. I didn't know that before." "You knew," she said gently. "You just didn't have room to admit it." That sentence stayed with me. For years, I had believed my marriage was peaceful because Daniel and I rarely shouted at each other. The truth was that we rarely shouted because I usually surrendered before his frustration reached that point. I changed plans when Harold objected. I accepted Daniel making commitments on our behalf without asking me. I sat through family dinners where every decision waited for Harold's approval. Harold always occupied the head of the table. It had started as a tradition. At least, that was how Daniel described it. Harold had raised him alone after Daniel's mother died, worked long hours, and built a business that supported them both. Daniel spoke of those sacrifices as if they had created a debt that could never be repaid. At restaurants, Harold chose the location. During holidays, he selected the schedule. If I wanted to see my own relatives, Daniel first calculated whether it interfered with his father's plans. Whenever I objected, he reminded me of everything Harold had done for him. I respected that history. I had tried to honor it. Somewhere along the way, respect had become obedience. The bus seat made the hierarchy literal. Harold was standing, I was sitting. Daniel could not tolerate the image. It did not matter that the seat existed for people in my condition. It did not matter that Harold had said he could remain standing. In Daniel's mind, his father's position required everyone else to move. By mid-morning, Daniel was calling every few minutes. I replied once in writing, "I am safe. The baby is safe. I will communicate by message. Do not come to Lena's home." His answer arrived immediately. "So this is what we're doing now? You're hiding from your husband?" I did not respond. Then he sent a longer message. He said he had been under pressure. He said Harold had looked tired. He said the passengers had misunderstood the situation because they did not know our family. That part was true. The passengers did not know our family. They had no reason to treat Harold as the highest authority. They saw only an able-bodied man accepting a seat from a pregnant woman after her husband pulled her up. Without the weight of family history, the act had looked exactly like what it was. By afternoon, Harold began contacting relatives. The calls came from numbers I recognized and a few I did not. Some relatives asked whether I was safe. Others told me that Daniel had made a mistake and deserved the opportunity to explain. One aunt said I should consider how serious an official report could become for his future. Nobody had to remind me how serious the incident could have been for mine. I turned the phone over. That evening, Daniel sent a voice message. His tone was controlled again, the calm, managerial voice he used when he wanted to sound like the only reasonable person in the conversation. He said he loved me. He said we were about to become parents. He said a strong marriage could survive one bad afternoon. Then he added that I needed to admit I had also contributed by refusing to show Harold basic respect. There it was, the condition beneath the apology. Daniel regretted the consequences. He did not regret the hierarchy. I deleted the voice message from the screen, but preserved the original file with the other evidence. The next morning, I received confirmation that the transit authority had located the relevant camera footage and placed it on hold. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I began crying. Lena found me sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in one hand and a cup of tea cooling beside the other. "They have the footage," I said. "That's good. I know." But the confirmation removed another path back to denial. The recording meant the incident had happened as I remembered. The transit footage meant it had happened from more than one angle. The driver's report meant an independent person had documented my condition and Daniel's behavior immediately. The medical record meant I had sought care rather than inventing fear afterward. Truth was becoming solid around me. And with every piece that became harder to deny, returning to Daniel became harder to imagine. I spent the following day building a timeline. It was the kind of task I understood. As a benefits compliance analyst, I worked with dates, records, and decisions that needed to withstand scrutiny. I knew the difference between remembering something and preserving it. I saved Arthur's original recording in 2 secure locations. I recorded the transit report number. I downloaded Daniel's messages instead of relying on screenshots alone. I wrote down what had happened on the bus while the sequence remained clear. Then I opened older conversations. At first, I searched only for messages concerning the pregnancy. What I found made my stomach tighten. 3 weeks earlier, I had declined a family outing because standing for long periods had become uncomfortable. Daniel had sent Harold a message saying I was beginning to treat pregnancy like a disability. Harold had answered that women had been giving birth for thousands of years. Daniel had replied that he would handle it. At the time, I had known nothing about that exchange. Another conversation concerned the birth itself. Harold wanted immediate access to the hospital while I had asked Daniel to wait until I felt ready for visitors. Daniel told his father not to worry because he would make sure nobody shut him out. He had never told me he made that promise. The messages did not reveal a secret crime or an elaborate conspiracy. They revealed something more ordinary and more painful. Daniel had been managing me. When he agreed with me privately, he reassured Harold that my boundary would not last. When Harold complained, Daniel promised to bring me back into line. The bus confrontation was not Daniel suddenly becoming someone else. It was Daniel enforcing a role he had assigned me long before I understood it. I contacted a local family safety service using the number provided at the hospital. The advocate did not tell me what decision to make. She asked practical questions. Did Daniel have access to my accounts? Did he know where I was staying? Did I have my identification and medical information? Could I reach the hospital without relying on him? Was there anyone authorized to make decisions if I became unable to communicate during delivery? Each question exposed another place where I had assumed Daniel's reliability without considering what would happen if his interests and mine separated. My salary still entered our joint account. Most household payments were scheduled through Daniel's login. My insurance and work benefits were secure, but my hospital bag and personal documents remained at the townhouse. I opened an individual account and arranged for future income to enter it. I did not empty the shared account or conceal money. I preserved statements and documented the balance. Every action felt enormous, even when it involved nothing more than a password, a form, or a phone call. By evening, I had moved from asking whether I should return to planning how not to. Daniel requested a meeting. I refused to meet at the townhouse. Eventually, we agreed to speak in a quiet conference room at the Family Safety Center, where another person remained nearby. When Daniel entered, he looked exhausted. For one dangerous second, I wanted to comfort him. Then I remembered the bus. He sat across from me and placed his hands on the table. "I don't recognize us anymore," he said. "Neither do I. We were fine on Saturday morning." "No, we were quiet." He looked down. "I lost my temper. You made a decision. I should not have grabbed you." It was the first direct acknowledgement he had made. I waited. "But you have to understand what it looked like," he continued. "My father was standing while my younger wife sat in front of him. I felt the last part of my hope fold inward. You still think I should have moved? I think families make sacrifices. Why was I the only person expected to make one? Dad raised me alone. I know. He spent his whole life taking care of me. That does not make my body payment on your debt." Daniel leaned back. "That's a terrible way to describe it. It's what happened. No, Naomi, I saw my father standing, and I reacted. I'm admitting I reacted badly. Why isn't that enough? Because you still believe the reason was valid." He rubbed both hands over his face. "We're weeks away from having a baby." "I know. Do you want her born into this?" That question had controlled me for years, even before our daughter existed. My parents' conflict had made my childhood unpredictable. I had promised myself that my own child would have both parents beneath one roof. Daniel knew that. He was offering the image I wanted while refusing the safety it was supposed to represent. "I want her born into a home where no one is punished for saying no. I would never treat our daughter that way." "You treated her mother that way while she was inside me." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You're turning one mistake into my entire character." "No, I'm looking at what you've done since." I apologized. "You blamed my reaction. Your father blamed me. Your relatives called me. You asked me to change my report. I asked you not to destroy our future over this. You keep talking as if my honesty is the danger." Daniel stood. The person outside the room moved closer to the door, but I raised one hand to show that I was all right. Daniel lowered his voice. If you file for an order against me, there is no coming back from that. I looked at him. It was meant as a warning. Instead, it gave me clarity. He still believed returning to him was the reward he could withdraw. I'm not asking to come back, I said. Daniel stared at me for several seconds. Then he left. I remained in the conference room until my breathing steadied. That afternoon, I began the formal separation process and requested temporary protection, limiting Daniel's direct contact with me. I did not feel brave. I felt sick, tired, and deeply sad. But courage was not the absence of those feelings. It was completing the next necessary step while they were present. With assistance, I arranged to retrieve essential belongings from the townhouse without entering alone. Daniel was not there when I arrived. Harold was. He stood on the front step with his arms folded. This is unnecessary, he said. I did not answer. You're humiliating my son. I continued toward the door with the authorized escort beside me. Harold stepped into my path. He made one mistake. I stopped. No, he made a choice. Then both of you spent days defending it. You have no idea what family loyalty means. I know what you mean by it. His face tightened. You'll regret breaking your daughter's family. I rested one hand over my stomach. My daughter's family begins with keeping her safe. Harold looked as if I had spoken a language he refused to understand. I entered the townhouse. The nursery was exactly as I had left it. A box containing the crib hardware sat open on the floor. Tiny clothes were folded inside the dresser. A framed print leaned against the wall, waiting to be hung. For several minutes, I stood in the doorway, grieving a future that had never existed in quite the form I imagined. Then I packed my hospital bag. I collected my documents, work computer, medication, and enough clothing for the coming weeks. I left the crib. Not because it belonged to Daniel, but because I no longer wanted my daughter's first safe room built inside a house where my refusal had become an offense. As I walked out, Harold remained on the step. He did not apologize. He did not move. This time, I was the one who passed him without surrendering my place. The temporary hearing occurred before my daughter was born. By then, Daniel had retained an attorney and submitted a written response describing the bus incident as a misunderstanding caused by concern for his aging father. His account claimed that I had begun standing voluntarily and that he steadied me when the bus shifted. It was a careful version. It removed his command. It removed my refusal. It removed his hand pulling me up. It removed the reason Arthur began recording. If I had possessed only my memory, I might have wondered whether Daniel's version sounded more reasonable than mine. But I did not arrive with memory alone. Arthur's original recording had been authenticated and preserved. The transit authority supplied the footage from the bus cameras. Elena's report documented the stop, my pregnancy, Daniel's interference, and the assistance request. The hospital record established when I sought evaluation and what I reported before any legal dispute began. The passenger statements confirmed what they heard and saw. Daniel's later messages showed his effort to make me change the official account. Harold's messages showed the pressure surrounding that effort. The earlier conversations established what Daniel had been telling his father before the incident. No single item carried the entire truth. Together, they formed a sequence Daniel could not rearrange. I sat quietly while his attorney explained that Daniel was a stable professional with no prior record. That was true. He had maintained steady employment. He paid his obligations. He had never before been formally accused of hurting me. Those facts mattered, but they did not erase the bus. Daniel answered questions in the calm voice he used at work. He said he had seen his father struggling. The transit footage showed Harold standing steadily. He said he believed I intended to rise. Arthur's recording captured me refusing. He said he reached out only after the bus moved. The wider camera angle showed his hand closing around my arm before the vehicle changed speed. He said he immediately expressed concern. Elena's report recorded him repeatedly insisting that I was fine while she attempted to assess me. Each contradiction weakened the next explanation. Harold supported Daniel's account. He described himself as tired and uncomfortable. Nobody disputed that standing might have been unpleasant for him. The issue was not whether Harold wanted a seat. The issue was why Daniel believed the solution was to force me from mine. When asked whether he told Daniel to stop, Harold said everything happened too quickly. Arthur's recording showed several seconds between my refusal and Daniel's action. When asked why he accepted the seat afterward, Harold said he had been shocked. The video showed him looking at the priority sign before sitting. Arthur testified without anger. He explained that he had noticed Daniel's tone and began recording because the disagreement appeared to be escalating. He identified the file and confirmed that he had not edited or posted it. Daniel's attorney asked whether Arthur knew anything about our marriage. Arthur said he did not. That answer strengthened his evidence rather than weakening it. He had no personal loyalty to me. He had no history with Daniel. He had simply watched what happened and preserved it. When it was my turn, I kept my statement factual. I described the seat. I described telling Daniel no. I described his hand on my arm. I described the messages and pressure that followed. I did not call Daniel a monster. I did not claim every day of our marriage had been terrible. I acknowledged the years when he was dependable, the appointments he attended, and the home we built. Then I explained why those things no longer answered the central question. I need to know that saying no will not place me or my child at risk, I said. Daniel still believes I should have given up the seat. He has apologized for the attention and the consequences, but he has not accepted that he had no right to force me. Daniel looked at me across the room. For the first time, his expression contained something other than anger. He looked wounded. Part of me still responded to that pain. 5 years of love did not disappear because the truth became clear. But empathy did not require surrender. The decision established temporary boundaries on Daniel's contact with me. Communication concerning medical or legal necessities had to occur through approved written channels. He could not approach Lena's home or my workplace, and he could not use relatives to contact me on his behalf. The order did not decide the entire future. It did not end the marriage that day. It did not settle parenting arrangements for a child who had not yet been born. It created space. For the first time, Daniel could not enter my life simply because he believed he belonged there. Outside the hearing room, he approached only as far as the boundary permitted. His attorney remained beside him. "I'll do counseling," Daniel said, "whatever they want." I studied his face. A few weeks earlier, those words might have brought me home. Now I understood that entering a program and changing were not the same. "Do it because you need to understand what happened," I said. "I'm doing it for us. There is no us right now." His jaw tightened. "You already decided that before anyone heard my side." "I listened to your side for days. Your side still requires me to accept part of the blame." "You refused to move." "Yes," I said, and I was allowed to refuse. He looked away. That was the point he still could not cross. Daniel wanted forgiveness without surrendering the belief that caused the harm. He wanted to keep his reason and erase only his reaction. I could not build safety on that distinction. Harold waited near the elevators. When Daniel joined him, they spoke in low voices. Harold glanced toward me with open resentment. Daniel did not defend me, but he did not immediately answer his father either. It was the first visible fracture between them, not a transformation, only the beginning of Daniel confronting the cost of obedience. The investigation connected to the bus incident continued separately. Daniel eventually accepted formal responsibility for his conduct under an outcome that included supervision, behavioral intervention, and compliance with the protective terms. He did not lose his job. The recording never appeared online. There was no public campaign and no sudden destruction of his entire life. The consequences were quieter and more precise. He lost the assumption that he could return home whenever he chose. He lost unrestricted access to me. He lost control over the story. Most importantly, he lost my trust. Those consequences had not been imposed by strangers. They had grown directly from his choices. The final weeks of my pregnancy were not triumphant. They were lonely. Some mornings I woke relieved that I did not have to monitor Daniel's mood. On other mornings, I reached toward the empty side of the bed before remembering that I was in Lena's spare room. I mourned ordinary things. The way Daniel used to leave a glass of water beside the bed. The list of possible baby names saved on his phone. The sound of him assembling furniture in the nursery. Those memories remained real. So did the bus. Recognizing harm did not require pretending that every moment before it had been false. It required accepting that good memories could not make an unsafe pattern acceptable. Daniel entered the required intervention program. Through approved channels, I received confirmation of his attendance. He completed forms, appeared at appointments, and followed the temporary contact restrictions. Harold treated every requirement as proof that the system had turned against his son. He attempted to send messages through relatives until the boundaries were reinforced. After that, his contact stopped. The silence brought relief, but it also brought grief. I had once imagined Harold holding his granddaughter in the hospital. I had pictured family photographs and holiday meals. Then I remembered the head of the table. I did not want my daughter raised to believe that love flowed downward through a hierarchy and that the person with the least authority had to sacrifice the most. I found a small apartment near the medical district and a reliable bus route. It was not available until after my delivery, but I signed the lease and began arranging the essentials. The nursery would be smaller than the one in the townhouse. It would also be safe. 5 weeks after the bus incident, I went into labor. Lena took me to the hospital. The protective arrangements and visitor instructions had been documented in advance, so I did not have to argue about them while in pain and exhausted. Daniel was notified through the appropriate channel after our daughter was born safely. When the nurse placed her in my arms, the room became very quiet. She was smaller than every fear I had carried and more real than every future I had imagined. I studied her face and understood that I had not broken her family. I had interrupted a pattern before she learned to call it normal. Daniel sent a message asking whether we were healthy. For once, the question came without accusation. I answered briefly. "We are both safe." He requested a photograph. I sent one through the approved channel after considering it carefully. His reply came several minutes later. "She's beautiful." I believed he meant it. Daniel's capacity to love his daughter had never been the only issue. Love without boundaries, accountability, and safety was not enough. The first parenting arrangements were temporary and supervised. Daniel objected, insisting that the bus incident involved me rather than the baby. The evaluators did not treat our daughter as separate from the environment surrounding her mother. Daniel's continued minimization mattered. His compliance with intervention mattered. His behavior during supervised contact mattered. No single moment determined everything. He was given a path toward safer involvement, but not the automatic authority he expected. During the first supervised visit, I waited in another room. Every part of me wanted to know how he held her and whether she cried. I reminded myself that supervision was not punishment. It was a structure designed to protect everyone, while Daniel demonstrated what kind of father he would choose to become. Afterward, I received a neutral update confirming that the visit had proceeded appropriately. Relief passed through me. I wanted my daughter to have a safe father. I no longer believed it was my responsibility to pretend he was already one. Harold requested independent access through Daniel. I refused. He had not acknowledged the bus incident, the pressure afterward, or his role in the hierarchy. Age and family title did not entitle him to bypass the boundaries surrounding my child. His response accused me of using the baby as revenge. I did not engage. Revenge would have centered Harold. My decision centered my daughter. When I moved into the new apartment, Lena helped me carry boxes while the baby slept nearby. The furniture did not match. The crib was simple. The kitchen table had only 2 chairs. Neither chair belonged permanently to the most powerful person in the room. That first night, I sat beside my daughter's crib and listened to the sounds of buses passing several streets away. For years, silence had meant I had successfully prevented conflict. Now silence meant nobody was waiting for me to surrender. The divorce took months rather than one dramatic afternoon. Daniel continued attending intervention, though his reasons were not always clear. Sometimes his written communication showed greater restraint. At other times, the old language returned, especially after he spoke with Harold. He wanted credit for every appointment. He wanted progress measured quickly. Trust did not return on his timetable. The final parenting arrangement gave me primary physical custody. Daniel's contact remained supervised until the required evaluations and behavioral conditions were satisfied. The arrangement did not declare him incapable of ever changing. It required change to become observable before it became trusted. Daniel accepted the divorce only after exhausting every argument for postponing it. He told me we were throwing away 5 years. I answered that I was refusing to throw away the future in order to justify the past. Harold remained part of Daniel's life, but their relationship was no longer effortless. Daniel had begun to recognize that his father never told him to protect me, apologize without conditions, or accept the consequences honestly. Harold, meanwhile, blamed Daniel for allowing outsiders to interfere. They remained connected through history, loyalty, and resentment. I stopped trying to repair what belonged to them. After maternity leave, I returned to work. My first weeks were difficult. I worried about my daughter while commuting, checked my phone too often, and sometimes felt guilty for enjoying the ordinary rhythm of my job. Gradually, a new routine formed: home, childcare, work, supervised parenting exchanges handled through established procedures, medical appointments without Daniel speaking for me, decisions made without asking whether Harold would approve. Nothing about the life looked spectacular from the outside. That was what made it precious. Arthur contacted me once after the legal process ended. He asked only whether the baby and I were safe. I replied, "We are. Thank you for refusing to look away." His response was brief. "You made the hard decisions. I only preserved what happened." After that, he returned to his life, and I returned to mine. One bright morning, several months after my daughter's birth, I boarded a city bus with her resting against my chest. The bus was moderately crowded. As I moved past the driver, a passenger near the front noticed the baby and gestured toward the priority seating. For 1 second, I stopped. The blue seat looked almost identical to the one Daniel had forced me to surrender. My body remembered before my mind did: the pressure of his hand, the silence around us, Harold lowering himself into my place. Then my daughter shifted against me. I looked at the empty seat. Nobody was demanding that I prove I deserved it. Nobody was measuring my need against a family hierarchy. Nobody was waiting for me to apologize. I sat down. The passenger smiled and returned to the window. The bus moved into traffic, carrying us past the courthouse, the medical district, and the streets where I had rebuilt my life, one practical decision at a time. I adjusted my daughter's blanket and held her securely as the city passed outside. The seat was not a throne. It was not a reward. It was simply support that I was allowed to accept. For most of my marriage, I believed peace meant making myself small enough that nobody had a reason to become angry. I know better now. Peace is being able to say no without fear. It is knowing that love does not require humiliation. It is raising my daughter in a home where respect travels in every direction. And sometimes peace is as ordinary as taking the seat you need without asking anyone's permission.